Bun găsit! În această seară, pe lângă rubricile obișnuite, vă vom prezenta un interviu cu Andrei Kurkov, cel mai cunoscut scriitor ucrainean, un scriitor militant în războiul de apărare pe care țara sa îl duce împotriva Rusiei. Iată sumarul ediției. Vom începe cu falsul săptămânii. Gabriela Avram ne vorbește despre jurnaliștii aflați în teritoriile ocupate de ruși, care sunt obligați să difuzeze propaganda Kremlinului.
În orașele ocupate, nu numai însemnele naționale ale Ucrainei sunt înlocuite. Sunt înlocuiți și jurnaliștii care condamnă invazia trupelor ruse și refuză să transmită știri favorabile politicii Kremlinului.
Так, уже несколько недель о жизни в Бердянске можно говорить с определением «мирная». Наш оператор походил по городу и просто поснимал улицы, заглянул на местный рынок. На кадрах видно, что Бердянск живет повседневными делами. Выходят на маршруты и общественный транспорт, люди свободно перемещаются и чувствуют себя в безопасности.
Canalul pro-Kremlin susține că așa arată viața în orașul recent ocupat Berdiansk. Nimic despre invazie, pentru că dincolo de războiul armelor există războiul informațional. Forțele armate ruse ocupă turnurile de emisie, întrerup programele de știri ucrainene și pornesc semnalele pentru emisiunile pro-ruse. Numai puțin de 8 canale de televiziune sunt folosite acum pentru a transmite știri pe placul Moscovei, a declarat pentru BBC un reprezentant al Serviciului de Comunicații Speciale de Stat al Ucrainei. Până în 24 februarie, data începutului invaziei în Ucraina, cei din regiunile aflate sub controlul trupelor ruse puteau urmări zeci de canale naționale ucrainene. Acum au acces la 24 de canale de televiziune de stat rusești și la cele care emit din republicile autoproclamate din estul Ucrainei. Așa e viața și în Berdiansk. Jurnalistul Serhii Starușco a declarat pentru BBC cum, după ce a fost bătut și amenințat cu arma de către soldații ruși, a fost rât în fața camerei și obligat să spună că a declarat război naționaliștilor ucraineni. Această declarație obținută abuziv urma să fie postată online, dacă refuza să coopereze, adică să divulge adresele și contactele soldaților și opozanților ucraineni. După ocuparea postului, televiziunile rusești au informat că armata a fost nevoită să preia controlul asupra stației, deoarece aceasta răspândea dezinformări despre situația din oraș. Pe lângă înlocuirea echipelor editoriale pro-ucrainene cu jurnaliști loiali Kremlinului, rușii recurg și la stratagema răspândirii de conținut editorial favorabil atribuit în mod fals publicațiilor care refuză să promoveze politica ocupanților. Mihail Ocumoc, proprietarul unei mici afaceri de presă din orașul Melitopol, și-a văzut numele ziarului folosit la răspândirea propagandei rusești după ce a refuzat să-și subordoneze publicația invadatorilor. Analiștii politici spun că aceeași tactică a fost folosită și în 2014, când Rusia a invadat Crimea, doar că atunci situația a fost alta, iar forțele ruse nu au întâmpinat niciun fel de rezistență. Acum însă, felul în care comunică președintele ucrainean Volodymyr Zelensky, folosind tot ceea ce înseamnă social media și care se adresează direct poporului rus, ridică probleme mari Kremlinului. Rusia a ales să intre în războiul informațional, ocupând posturi de televiziune, amenințând și răpind jurnaliști, folosind cenzura și știri false. Nici bombardarea turnului din Kiev nu a fost întâmplătoare și viza de fapt întreruperea transmiterii informațiilor.
Andrei Kurkov este cel mai cunoscut scriitor ucrainean contemporan. El s-a aflat în România cu ocazia lansării celui mai recent roman al său, Albinele gri. Cu această ocazie ne-a acordat televiziunii române un interviu în exclusivitate. Andrei Kurkov, thank you for accepting this interview. You were born in Leningrad, grew up in Kiev, and you live now both in Kiev and London. You are Ukrainian's best-selling author. You changed your location twice since Russia invaded Ukraine after receiving information that you are on a wanted list because of your outspoken criticism of President Vladimir Putin. Will you go back from Bucharest to Kiev with your family, your wife and 3 children?
Well, first of all, I don't know exactly whether I'm on the wanted list or not, but I'm sure the whole of Ukrainian culture is in danger and on the wanted list, because 2 years ago there was an attempt to kidnap Ukrainian cult poet Sergei Zhadan in Minsk. We are now in Transcarpathian region near Uzhhorod with my wife and my elder son. And I would like to go to Kiev because many people are coming back to Kiev. But from Kiev, you cannot travel abroad now. And I am traveling to take part in the conferences and in the events dedicated to Ukraine. So probably we'll stay in Western Ukraine for now.
But this information is real about the wanted list. And we know some other major writers, Russian also, that are afraid for their life, and Kasparov also. So is this real?
I don't know. I haven't seen the list, so I cannot say. I know that I'm announced an enemy of Russian culture. There were articles against me and my books in Russian press, and my books are not on sale anymore and not published in Russia. First time they were banned in 2005. Then from 2008, no more new editions. And from 2014, it is illegal to bring my books for sale from Ukraine to Russia. So I am not on the welcome list. But in journalism, you have to produce facts. So I don't have this list in my hands, I cannot say. I know that I am not a very welcome person and probably in danger. But that's all I can say.
But till 2005, they considered you a Russian writer or a Ukrainian writer?
Well, in Russia, they were considering me a Russian writer, and even Tatiana Tolstoy in one of the interviews said that, no, he is a Russian writer, and everybody who writes in Russian is a Russian writer. But afterwards, actually, there was some kind of change, and some Russian intellectuals agreed that Russian language literature is not necessarily Russian literature. And I belong to Russian language literature of Ukraine. There are Russian language writers in Switzerland, Mikhail Shishkin, or in New York, or in Israel. So, I mean, it's, Russian language became lingua franca like French and English. And the history of Russian language reminds me the history of francophonie, of French language culture.
And what happened in 2005?
Well, the Orange Revolution happened. Okay. And first time, actually, Ukraine showed that Ukraine doesn't want to live according to the Russian metrics of political and social life. And I mean, I should say that Russians and Ukrainians are very different, not the same people as Putin says, that's for sure, because they have 2 different mentalities. Russians are collective. They are used to the monarchy. I mean, in fact, the Soviet Union was a communist monarchy because every general secretary of the Communist Party worked as a general secretary until his death, except for Ukrainian Nikita Khrushchev, who was dismissed after Karib crisis. And now, actually, Russia is back to the monarchy. They love their Tsar, Vladimir Putin, and they will stay with him and defend him, and he will talk on behalf of Russian nation. Ukrainians are individualists, and they are anarchists also, natural anarchists, because in 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, Ukraine was independent territory with no monarchy, no royal family, no aristocracy, but they had elections of hetmans. Hetman was the head of the state, head of the army, and he was elected. He was not sort of appointed or put in place by some other forces. And so, I mean, Ukrainians are used to elect whom they will hate later. So I mean, this is a traditional, I mean, the best example of Ukrainian individualism is the fact that Ukraine has more than 400 political parties registered in the Ministry of Justice of Ukraine. So we never have the same party ruling the country. Every party which comes with the president disappears after the president is gone. And people don't remember these political parties, but they were forces, important forces in politics for 3, 4 years, for 2 years. I mean, like Yanukovych's party, Party of Region, which is from Donbass. Nobody thinks about this party anymore. Yanukovych is in Moscow, the party is gone.
But this is democracy. I mean, Putin is afraid of that kind of democracy. He's afraid that Russians will look at Ukraine and said, okay, this is possible also in Russia.
This is true, but in fact, this type of democracy existed also in Russia in the beginning of 20th century. There were many political forces and parties present in the parliament in 1912, 13, 14. But I mean, it's gone because I mean, now it is authoritarian one-party system like Soviet Union. So if you are a functionary, if you are state servant, you have to belong to United Russia Party of President Putin. And this is the Soviet system just reworked and turned into some kind of state capitalism.
What is Ruski Mir?
Ruski Mir, I mean, it was started as a humanitarian project to unite all Russian speakers in the world around Moscow, sort of to make them friendly and loyal to Russia independently from their passports. But very quickly, and maybe from the very beginning, the idea behind it was actually geopolitical, to be able to use all Russian speakers in the world as the political forces which will defend and support any policy Moscow wants to have. And we see it now in Germany, where the demonstrations to support the war in Ukraine are organized in Berlin, in Köln, in German cities by descendants of Russian emigres and by ex-Soviet people.
And these guys, you think, are free? I mean, they do that by their own will, or it's orchestrated?
Some of them probably do. Some of them do love Putin and think actually, I mean, it's very strange to think that actually if you left Russia or Soviet Union and you have a comfortable, free life in the West, and I mean, it's strange, I mean, you will have attachment, emotional attachment to your motherland, to your roots, but not to political system that Putin installed. But they do, I mean, many people of Russian origin in the West, they support Putin. They think it is nice that the world is afraid of Russia, afraid of Putin. That means that they are becoming more important. I mean, if somebody is afraid of you, you are not more important, you are more dangerous.
You said that the Ukrainian, their destiny is individual, and the Russians' destiny is collective. Yeah. But the most significant minority in Ukraine is the Russian one. Yeah. And maybe Putin hope that the Russians in Ukraine will welcome the Russian army with flowers, like liberators. Why he was wrong?
Well, first of all, of course, he was misinformed by his FSB generals, and apparently one of the generals now is under arrest. He got a lot of false information about the political mood in Russian-speaking community in Ukraine. Most of Russian speakers in Ukraine, they are Ukrainians, they are not Russians politically, not ethnically. And actually, they are used to freedom. They can see that in Russia you can be put into prison or you can be fined for reposting something on Facebook. The Ukrainians of any origin are so used to freedom, they cannot imagine that actually coming back to this Soviet kind of control. So I mean, also Russian speakers, if you speak Russian, it doesn't mean that you love Putin and you support his ideas. You can be more interested in Russian culture, or you could be before this war, because now it is actually over with Russian culture. But in fact, actually, Russian speakers also became the first victims of this war, because Mariupol is a Russian-speaking city with Russian and Greek ethnic minority. And 10 or 20,000 people are killed there. Kharkiv is bombed by Russia every day. It is a Russian-speaking city. 95% of people in Kharkiv speak Russian language. Chernihiv, probably 70% of Russian speakers. It is not a war to defend Russian speakers or to defend ethnic Russians. It's the war to incorporate Ukraine into new Russian Empire or new Soviet Union. That's why actually the Russian speakers, most of them, I mean, they are afraid of this prospect in the future. They want to remain free. I'm sure there is some percentage of Russian speakers and ethnic Russians who support Putin in Ukraine, who would like to bring flowers to the army. But I mean, they are a tiny minority and nobody will sell them flowers for this purpose.
You said that the biggest victim of this war will be Russian language and Russian culture. How come?
Well, because we live in the world when the culture can be cancelled. And it happened before the war in Europe. And now it's turn for Russian culture to be cancelled in Ukraine because Russian language is officially the language of the enemy. And it's interesting that this is repeated by people who speak Russian in Ukraine. So they are sacrificing their mother tongue in their thoughts for the future of their country. Many people are changing language. I mean, they start speaking Ukrainian. Lots of Russian speakers started writing posts on Facebook in Ukrainian instead of Russian, including me. I do use sometimes Russian because I don't want to say that I just sort of reject my mother tongue. I mean, my mother tongue doesn't depend on Putin, and Putin has no monopoly on the Russian language. But I understand the emotions of Ukrainians who lost their parents, children, relatives and friends because of the Russian invasion. And so everything which is coming from Russia is something to deal with enemy. It should be stopped, and it should be safeguarded, and it should be actually resisted.
You will write from now on in Russian, or you wrote some books
I wrote
in
some
Ukrainian,
books in Ukrainian,
also?
but fiction, novels, I will continue to write in Russian because it is my mother tongue. I can write much better in my mother tongue than in Ukrainian, which I learned many years ago. I mean, I speak without accent, but my knowledge of Ukrainian is not sufficient to be such a good writer in Ukrainian as, for example, Taras Prochasko or Yurko Vinnichuk, who were brought up and who grew up with Ukrainian language. So I don't want to assimilate. I want to be integrated. And I think actually many minorities in Ukraine are not properly integrated, not because they did not want to integrate, because they were ignored by politicians for a long time.
I mean, Russian language and the culture and the literature will survive Putin, no?
Dostoevsky will survive Putin, but Dostoevsky will also suffer, like Pushkin will suffer, because Pushkin is used now by Russian ideologists in the demonstrations, for example, organized by the librarians in Russia in support of Russian army. They are using Pushkin, they are using Russian culture, they are using everything from ballet to theater to show that they are higher race. And I think also Europe should be very aware of this, because Russia was investing in the cultural image of their country millions and millions of dollars and euros over 20 years, trying to compensate with this positive cultural image their negative political image. And now people think that they know everything about Russian culture, but they know nothing about Russian politics. Only now they can see the results of this politics on TV, in the news.
We talk about the great Russian culture these days, and about the West who wants to cancel this culture. And we are talking about Tchaikovsky, who is not played anymore in by some orchestra, and about Gergiev, and about Anna Netrebko, and so on and so on. It's a proper topic, this one. I mean, there is a war and children dying there. Do we have to talk about the great Russian culture these days?
I think it's better to take a break and not to talk about great Russian culture in the times when actually great Russian culture is used to destroy Ukraine and Ukrainian culture. I wouldn't mix Netrebko, Gergiev and Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky is dead. He was an excellent composer. He was also partially Ukrainian and he lived in Ukraine. But Netrebko and Gergiev, they supported openly Putin's policies, and they are responsible for this war as well and as much as Putin and other politicians of Russia.
Some of your friends, writer friends, like Sorokin and Shishkin and so on, and Ulitskaya, are living already in exile in West. They are opposing the war, they are opposing to Putin. But some other great writers are still living in Russia, and they are supporting Putin and the messianic role of Russian civilization. Do you think that the West will read these writers in other way after the war?
You know, it's interesting that the writers who support Putin are not translated into foreign languages. They are not international writers. They are not telling the story of Russia to the outside world, unlike Shishkin, unlike Sorokin, unlike Ulitskaya. So we are dealing actually with the internal writers who support imperialistic ideology inside the country. So they are more like propagandists than writers. And yes, they sign open letters to support Russian aggression in Ukraine, but it doesn't make them great. It doesn't make them better as writers. So, I mean, I don't think we have to care about their books or what they are writing about, because their actions show us what they are.
You experienced the war. You lived in Kiev. How do you live through the war?
Well, I only stayed 2 or 3 days after the beginning of the war, but I can tell you that it is like completely different life begins when you are woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning by explosions outside your window. This is a terrible feeling. I mean, you feel helpless. You understand that now nothing material has any role. I mean, we left our apartment and a house in the countryside, and when I was driving for 22 hours to Lviv, mostly standing in the traffic jams, because, I mean, there were tens of thousands of cars escaping from everywhere in Ukraine, not only from Kiev. But, I mean, when you are in this state, you understand that the life which is behind you, the life which ended on the 24th of February, will never come back. It will never return. Your life is changed. I mean, you were born, I mean, I was told by my grandfather many years ago that how lucky you are you were born after the war. He meant after the Second World War. He didn't know that actually I was born before the war, not after the war. And I'm thinking now about my children who are 19, 24, and 25. I mean, they were born before the war, definitely. And they had this experience because they were all in Ukraine when it happened. And we had to look for our children because they were in Lviv on the day of the war, and Lviv was also bombarded. And my daughter lives in London. We don't live, with my wife, we don't live in London anymore. I mean, we used to go there and spend months and months until 1997, but since then we're just there for holiday. But my daughter, when she got stuck in Lviv, and then I had to find her and to take her to Uzhhorod, and my friends helped to send her to Slovakia. And then I was looking for a plane that could take her back to London because she lives and works there. I mean, I don't want you to have this experience.
You think that Ukrainians will be different after the war? The identity will be forged? They will look in some other way to the life?
It's a good question because I mentioned that Ukrainians are individualists. But this is the third time they got together to defend the future of their country. The first time was Orange Revolution. Second time was Euromaidan 2013-14, which ended up with annexation of Crimea and non-stop war in Donbass. And now the third time. So practically Putin was working hard to consolidate Ukrainian nation. And he achieved what he didn't want. Because, I mean, Ukrainian nation is ready to defend itself and to defend the Ukrainian statehood and independence. It doesn't mean that every Ukrainian is prepared to take arms. Of course, I mean, the society is different, but the number of people who are patriots and who don't see themselves as refugees abroad is much bigger now than it could be 20 years ago.
When you see the atrocities in Borodyanka, in Bucha, Irpin, and you hear Putin and the other guys, Peskov and so on, they are saying that everything is fake. What do you think?
No, I don't believe any word that Putin or Lavrov is saying already for 15 years. I mean, the lie is part of their politics. I mean, I think Putin said in 2014 or 15 that if we have to lie for the sake of our country, we will lie non-stop. So, I mean, this is the political culture and this is social culture because it means that actually all Russians are prepared to lie to defend what they think is right for Russia. And they think it is right to fight against Ukraine and to kill Ukrainian civilians. So, I mean, why should I take seriously whatever they say? The world already understands what they mean when they lie. And maybe not the whole world, because Europe definitely understands. Latin America doesn't, because it's too far away. And now, actually, the Russian propagandists are very active in Latin America, sharing fake news about Ukraine being a country of anti-Semitism and that it is dangerous to be a Jew in Ukraine. About corruption we can talk and talk and talk, and there is corruption, yes, but much less than it was before 2005.
And much less than in Russia.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Because Putin said that we have to save Ukrainians from corruption before invading. Yeah.
But in fact, I think the Russian losses in the war are also due to the Russian corruption in the military forces. So God bless their corruption. It helps us to survive also.
But what about the people in Russia? Do they believe in propaganda? Do they really believe that these atrocities were not committed by Russian army?
I think some people believe, maybe a lot of people who believe, but I'm sure there are people who are just afraid to say that they don't believe. So they will be silent. They are accomplices, because, I mean, if you are silent, if you know that this is not true, but you support it, you are also an accomplice. You are co-author of this tragedy. And I think, I mean, Russian nation will have to repent, like Germans had to repent for years and years after the Second World War.
In one of your books, you talk about a president that was poisoned. And also about the gas crisis. And actually, 2 years after, Yushchenko was poisoned and the gas crisis produced. How come you foresee these events?
I think it was easy to foresee, in fact, because, well, I was always crazy about reading news every day, sometimes several times a day. I'm still guilty that I'm wasting time even today.
Well, you used to be a journalist.
Yeah.
And a documentary
but I think actually the news is some kind of chess game. If you know the prehistory of something, you can probably foresee what will happen next logically if you know the mentality and you know the habits of the people involved, of the politicians involved. In the book you mentioned The President's Last Love. Actually, the book ends with the occupation of Ukraine organized by Putin with the help of Russian Orthodox Church and Russian Communist Party. I mean, it was exaggeration.
Well,
only to some extent, not 100% exaggeration.
And when the two generals from SBU came to you and asked you, maybe someone read your book and get an inspiration from there?
Well, it was a nice experience in 2005. I was invited to a Belgian restaurant, and these generals knew that I like cognac, so they immediately ordered 50 grams of Hennessy for me, and one of them asked, do you think somebody could use your book as a scenario to poison Yushchenko? And I remember my answer. I said, I don't believe it is possible, because people who professionally poison others, they don't read fiction. They read professional books on chemistry, on poison, etc. But that could be also foreseen, because before that we had a lot of assassinations with guns, machine guns and sniper weapons. And actually I think there was some kind of change coming, and there were already political poisoning before. Like a Russian banker of Greek origin, Dimitriadi, was poisoned in Moscow, and then Anna Politkovskaya, whom I knew very well, she was poisoned on the plane to Beslan during siege of Beslan. It was clear that now Russian secret services started using poison, and Litvinenko and Skripal and everything else. So this is all the bits of one and the same tendency. I'm not sure this tendency is over, by the way, because I don't know what will happen next to other opponents of Putin.
You were translated in more than 30 languages. One of your latest novel, Grey Bees, was translated in Romania recently. This is why you are in Romania now. Yeah. It's about life in Donbass, in the Grey territories, between the lines, between loyalists and separatists. And I was struck about the tragedy of these people, because I went there 3 years ago, and it's a huge drama. I mean, there are people who are trying to live, as you wrote, despite the war. But as we look into the main character, Sergei, do you think that one can remain innocent through this war?
I think people who theoretically can remain innocent, and civilians, I mean, they are not guilty anyway. Because, I mean, to have, for example, political pro-Russian views and to vote for pro-Russian political party is not a crime. It may become a crime after the war, because I think there will be no more pro-Russian political parties. But your political sympathies are not crime. So I don't think these people, whether they were pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian, but if they didn't kill, if they didn't collaborate with the enemy, they are not criminals and they are innocent in a way. And in this way, it is probably more difficult for them to survive than for some Ukrainian soldiers, especially now when the gray zone is over. It doesn't exist anymore. And we should understand that Donbass is a destroyed territory. Russia doesn't need Donbass for industrial reasons or for Russian language population. I don't know what will happen there, because once Donbass became part of the war zone, elite left Donbass. Political, business, cultural elite escaped from Donbass either to Russia or to Ukraine. And the territories were run by criminals and then by people sent from Russia. So, I mean, we are talking, and we should talk about ordinary civilians who lived there, who worked in the mines and in the factories. And then they remained there without mines, without job, without money, without infrastructure. And in the gray zone, without shops, without medicine, pharmacies. And so, I mean, for them to survive was a very difficult experience. I wish them to survive this war, but I'm not sure they will, because, I mean, they are becoming also a collateral damage. They become innocent victims whatever happens, because they are already victims. They lost not only the country, they lost normal life. They lost history of their families. If they escaped from the villages or towns where they lived, they lost connection with the graves of their ancestors.
I will not disclose the end of the novel, but still, do you think that it's any danger that the grey bees, the bad bees, infected by the Russian FSB, can overwhelm the good bees in Ukraine?
I don't believe it. I don't believe it because beekeeping culture is very ancient in Ukraine. In fact, actually, people first learned how to find honey from wild bees, and only much later they started baking bread. So in the very beginning, life was sweet, and then it was sweet and sour. For Ukrainians, beekeeping is important because actually every beekeeper is considered a wise man, because he understands the bees. And as Sergei says in the book, the bees are the only beings which achieved communist society, which built communist society where they work and they get what they need, not more, not less, and they don't complain. Ukrainian bees will be hard-working after the war, and they will not be influenced by any kind of enemy special operations, even in the beekeeping culture.
All your books are with a very good humor. I don't know if it's your natural humor or it's belong to the Ukrainian society, the Russian, I don't know, culture and so on. But you invented a moral category, black optimism. What is that?
Well, in 1992, when we had a huge social crisis in Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union, many of my friends emigrated to Germany and to Israel, and they were sure that I am going also to emigrate. And one of them, and I was always an optimist, and one of my friends, Sasha Belfer, before going to America, he asked me, are you still a stupid optimist, or you are now a normal pessimist like everybody else? And I said, no, I am a black optimist. And he asked, what does it mean, black optimist? And I said, it's somebody who knows that everything will be good in the end, but he is not sure he will survive to this moment. So I'm now a gray optimist. like gray bees. I believe that I can survive and I can see a happy end in this story, and I understand that happy end will be very bitter, of course, because of all the losses inflicted on Ukrainian state and society. But Ukraine will survive. Ukraine survived artificial famines in 1932-33, in 1947. Ukraine survived mass deportations of Ukrainian farmers who didn't want to be collectivized. Ukraine will survive this war. I mean, maybe Ukraine will become smaller because Russia is huge and has a huge army, and they can bite off more of Ukrainian territory, but Ukraine will resist to the very end, and I'm sure Ukraine will stand against the enemy.
What do you think about the West and the West hypocrisy? For a long time, even after 2014, and Ukraine was in war since then, the West preferred to do business with Putin and forget about war. Now, do you think that the West can do more?
I think I don't know everything the West is doing. I know that America is helping, Great Britain is helping a lot. Germany is finally ready to help. But actually it was Germany who was dealing with Putin more than other countries after annexation of Crimea and after the beginning of the war in Donbass. It was Angela Merkel who wanted to appease Putin and to build Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. And of course, I mean, for me, the actions like this showed that Ukraine meant nothing for Germany, because they wanted investment, to put investment in big country like Russia. Ukraine was smaller country and less important, less predictable. And the same probably can be said about other European countries. I mean, now they can see the result of this policy. Because in fact, actually, France and Germany were selling arms to Russia until the war began. From 2014, they were selling high technology arms and weapons to Russian army.
I'm quoting the title of one of your article in New Yorker. What will be the legacy of this Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Well, there will be several layers of legacy. I mean, cultural legacy, Ukrainian culture will be much more strong to resist other cultures, including Russian culture. Socially, it will be very traumatic for people who have relatives in Russia, and these relatives mostly support Putin. So there will be a lot of ties, family ties cut. Because what happened after 2014, for 2 years, relatives didn't talk to each other even on the phone. And then many families agreed to talk, but not to discuss politics. Now you cannot not discuss politics with your Russian relatives. On the political level, I think pro-Russian political parties will not be able to exist in Ukrainian politics, because they all turned out to be traitors and collaborators. And in the occupied territory now, in some places, new mayors are installed by Russian occupation forces who were members of the so-called Opposition for Life party, which is what remains from Party of Region, the pro-Russian political force. There will be other legacies, of course. Rebuilding of cultural heritage will require a lot of time and money, because we have theaters demolished and destroyed by bombings. We have museums burned down. We have hundreds of schools destroyed, universities damaged and destroyed. So, I mean, the education is also impacted, and it will have to be restructured. And I think everything Russian will go away from all educational processes. Now there are demands of the parents, for example, in Zhytomyr city, to exclude Russian language from curriculum, from school curriculum, to replace it with another additional foreign language. So I mean, the legacy will be very, very multifaceted and complicated, but Ukraine will have to deal with it.
Andrei Kurkov, thank you so much for this
interview. Thank you very much.
La revista presei Fake, Horia Grușcă ne vorbește despre fețele tragice ale dezinformării. Cum văd așadar cetățenii ruși această așa numită operațiune militară specială?
O familie modestă dintr-un cătun aflat lângă granița Rusiei cu Belarus își plânge fiul căzut în războiul din Ucraina. Așa începe reportajul jurnaliștilor britanici de la ITV News, care au încercat să afle la fața locului ce cred rușii despre așa numita operațiune specială ordonată de Vladimir Putin. Serghei Moraviov avea 22 de ani și conducea un vehicul blindat în 23 martie, când a fost ucis în sudul Ucrainei, la Zaporojie.
He was the best son. He always dreamed of being a soldier.
Părinții știu puține amănunte despre circumstanțele morții fiului lor.
We know he covered his comrades and peaceful citizens. We know that.
He received wounds to his spine and side because he protected people, his comrades.
Our daughter told us we should be very proud of our Serezhka because he was a hero, a defender of our country and fatherland.
How do you feel about the special operation in Ukraine and what he was there to do?
Do we support it? Yes.
Cea mai mare parte a informațiilor care ajung în acest loc uitat de lume vin de la televiziunea de stat, care descrie conflictul din Ucraina drept o luptă împotriva fasciștilor. Motiv pentru mătușa lui Serghei să facă o comparație cu cel de-al doilea război mondial.
We were born here. Our grandfathers and great-grandfathers are here. They defended our motherland. And now it is the turn of our children, our sons, and if needed, it will be the turn of us old people.
Oamenii nu uită că atunci când naziștii germani au ocupat satul, au incendiat toate casele. O amintire sumbră care face ca spectrul nazismului ucrainean evocat de Vladimir Putin să fie atât de puternic.
Даже не фашисты, они уже... They aren't even fascists. They are Satanists, tormenting peaceful citizens, women, children. I think this needs to go to the end. Нужно идти до конца.
Oricât de deformate, convingerile rudelor îndurerate ale lui Serghei sunt împărtășite de mulți cetățeni ruși, chiar și de cei din marile orașe. Principala cauză este aceeași: dezinformarea sistematică practicată de autorități și lipsa surselor de informare străine interzise de Kremlin.
Мне кажется, что это, в общем-то, то, что освещают украинские телеканалы, то это неправда. Я не верю просто в это.
А вы откуда черпаете?
Я с Ютуба и с телевизора, в общем-то.
Понятно. А то, что западные СМИ публикуют, вы видели?
Но нет.
Фейк это не фейк, знать-то мы откуда можем. Средства массовой информации говорят, что это фейк. Украинские наши... Почему-то все украинские радиостанции отключили, заглушили, то есть проанализировать, то есть ихнюю позицию мы не можем.
И там работает пропаганда. Естественно, каждая страна пытается донести свою правду. На мой взгляд, это не соответствует действительности, потому что смысл вообще это делать, когда мы там раздаем гуманитарную помощь в городах, а тут вдруг решили там людей направо-налево убивать. Это нелогично, и мне кажется, это фейк.
Наши одно говорят, подписано «Голос Америки» на BBC, те абсолютно противоположное. Мне кажется, провокация, просто провокация.
Вся родня на Украине, вся родня. Вот. И батюшка батя жив еще 93 года. Вот. Тоже мы долго с ним на эти темы не общались. И тем не менее, вот что вы творите, хотя сам родом с Сыктывкара. Я говорю, папа, я говорю, разуй глаза и иногда, хотя все российские каналы там отключены, поэтому он не может их смотреть, а смотрит только украинские.
Из российских СМИ говорят, что это все пропаганда. Да там в российских СМИ всегда говорят, что это пропаганда. Сами пропагандируют не понять что.
У меня есть своя точка зрения по этому поводу. Вот, я не готов.
Сказать на самом деле хочется очень многое, даже кричать, но, к сожалению, вряд ли что-либо вам прокомментирую, потому что в нашей стране с нашей свободой слова, как за любой комментарий можно грести последствий, приходится молчать.
Atât pentru astăzi. Miercurea viitoare vom vorbi despre incidentele din Transnistria de zilele trecute. Vom încerca să vedem dacă este un tipar, o înscenare care ar putea legitima o posibilă agresiune a Rusiei împotriva Republicii Moldova. Până miercurea viitoare. Cu bine!